New Orleans Saints wide receivers Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed remain in trade talks, but unless the price is right, I doubt they're going anywhere. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the Saints are what I would call healthy-ish going into their game up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, while the Buccaneers very much are not. We'll discuss Luke Fortner's big opportunity and the big shoes that he has to fill stepping in at starting center in this game up against the Bucs and what it means for quarterback Spencer Rattler. And we're going to kick everything off with trade talk. The trade deadline is right around the corner, and New Orleans Saints wide receivers Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed just can't seem to keep their names out of trade conversations. We got all that coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time being here with us, this time making us your first listen and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. Just like all of your favorite players, Mazda sweats every detail because when you make every moment count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. So stay tuned for this week's highlights in our Moving the Game Forward presented by Mazda. Mazda, move and be moved. The New Orleans Saints just can't seem to keep wide receivers Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave out of the sights of other NFL teams. The upcoming NFL trade deadline is, let's call it, a little more than 2 games away, right? Very shortly after. It's November 4th, so it's very shortly after the Saints travel back from Los Angeles, where they go to take on the Rams in Week 9 in that matchup. And we know that the Saints could potentially be open to conversations and trade talks in order to recoup some draft capital. The Saints only have 5 selections in this upcoming NFL draft in 2026. They could potentially earn a 6th back and recoup a 6th on a compensatory selection. That is a big thing to continue to watch, with Quincy Riley, the New Orleans Saints rookie cornerback, continuing to start, getting his first interception last week and looking to get a lot more comfortable at the position. Veteran Isaac Yiadom is getting healthier and does look much healthier, but as of right now has not re-entered the conversation of being the starter. We asked Kellen Moore what they're going to do at that position. He said that they will absolutely expect Quincy Riley to be the starter this weekend, and then they'll continue to see how things progress for Isaac Yiadom beyond that. So we'll see where things go, but the more that Yiadom stays off the field, the more opportunity the Saints have to potentially recoup a 4th-round compensatory selection after losing starting cornerback Paulson Adebo in free agency last year to the New York Giants. So with that being the case, the Saints could still be looking to maybe add some more draft assets in the upcoming years. It would be something that for a 1-6 rebuilding or developmental year team, it would make a lot of sense for them to be open to some of those conversations, but the price has got to be right. And the price for Chris Olave should be high. The price for Rashid Shaheed should be high. And so it might not be likely that teams are willing to meet the asking price for either one of those players. For New Orleans, moving on from Rashid Shaheed would be a trade that would probably have to net you something better than the 3rd-round compensatory pick you have the potential to get back for him should he sign a contract elsewhere this offseason. The Saints are obviously very interested in keeping both Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed in the building here in New Orleans. Chris Olave has been open about the fact that they have had trade conversations since the beginning of the year, I assume meaning the beginning of the offseason programs, things like that. And so it seems that the Saints have some interest in keeping them there. We heard Mickey Loomis over on WWL Radio speaking about how, maybe, teams might be interested and might be calling, but unless the offer is perfect, they're not really in a hurry to move off of any players, which is typically the case for teams in the Saints situation at this time of year. Just because other teams are interested or making phone calls or monitoring the situation around the receivers doesn't mean that the Saints are actively shopping the receivers. Those are not the same thing. You can be open for business without advertising, right? And the Saints are not advertising their players from the sounds of things to other teams, the other 31 NFL teams that might be looking for help at certain positions. And we know that wide receiver is a spot that a lot of teams are likely looking for help, whether it be because of injury purposes or other purposes. Wide receiver position is one of high need in a passing league in the NFL. And right now, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed on a 1-6 team, both of those guys, respectively, number 1 and number 2 for the Saints when it comes to receiving yards, number 1 and number 2 for the Saints when it comes to receiving touchdowns as well, and just barely not number 1 and number 2 when it comes to yards per reception. Chris Olave at 10.0, just behind tight end Juwan Johnson at 10.2, who is the third leading receiver right now for New Orleans. So the Saints have these two players that could potentially bring them in some good trade value if teams are willing to give it up. But the Saints should be stingy here. They should be open to conversations, but they should be stingy. I've always said respect Rashid Shaheed's gangsta. I think you got to say the same thing about Chris Olave. Chris Olave coming off of a career game, 98 receiving yards on 5 receptions, and his first multi-touchdown game of his career, 2 touchdown receptions, in that game up against the Chicago Bears last week. And so the price should be high on each one of these players. First round value is usually what you look for a number 1 wide receiver or a wide receiver that is a number 1 option on the team that is trading them away. If you're going to get that, maybe you have that conversation and you look to potentially make that move. That doesn't necessarily mean a first round pick, but like a second round pick and some day 3 selection or something like that to make it feel more like a first round value. Those are conversations the Saints should be at least open to having, because that's simply smart business. Smart business says you answer the phone, but it doesn't mean that you always make a deal before you hang it up. So there's a lot that could potentially be moving here as the Saints and the NFL nears the trade deadline on November 4th. But I don't know when it comes to these two wideouts if the Saints are very much in a hurry to move off of them, and therefore the price tag might be high because you're going to convince them to want to move on and move one of those players. There are other players that could potentially be tradable. Isaac Yiadom, who we mentioned, could be a tradable piece. Pete Werner could be a tradable piece. We've heard a lot about the Saints and Alontae Taylor having some conversations about extensions, but more and more we hear his name being a name that other teams are monitoring as well. Just because you're trading a player away doesn't mean that you don't want them to be a part of your system, though. It doesn't mean that you don't want them to be a part of your future, though. It's just, if you get a better offer and something that you're getting is worth what you would be losing for the 2025 season, then especially as a rebuilding team, it's probably something that you're going to listen to. So we'll continue to track and monitor everything going on around the trade conversation. I don't expect the Saints to be buyers, especially with the limited amount of draft capital that they now have in 2026, unless there's something that could happen with a 2027 or 2028. They could trade that. Yeah, three drafts down the road you can trade. So unless there's something to move from there, but for right now, I don't see the Saints necessarily in a hurry. They've got to kind of be convinced. So we'll see where things go, but expect the names of the Saints players to continue to pop up in more conversations about teams' interest outside of New Orleans. Coming up next, New Orleans Saints will have a new starting center, number 79, Luke Fortner, on Sunday. What other players and coaches have said about him and what it means for quarterback Spencer Rattler. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and there's only one way to get in on all of the action, and that's with our friends over at FanDuel, my favorite sportsbook, and the only one that I go to get in on all of not just the NFL action, but college football, the NBA is now underway, and so much more. You can get in on all of it over at FanDuel, and right now they're making sure that they have an offer for you that you won't want to miss, especially as a new customer. Right now, new customers can get $300 in bonus bets by simply winning your first $5 bet. That's all you got to do. Join up, pick a bet, put $5 down. If it hits, you unlock $300 in bonus bets used across the app on other odds, lines, and props, same game parlays, live betting, and so much more. The New Orleans Saints going into this weekend's matchup as 4.5-point underdogs at home up against the NFC South leading Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You want to get on all that? What are you waiting for? Head over to FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends over at Rippling. If you're a business owner, here's the truth. SaaS promised to make your work easier, but now the average company is buried by hundreds of apps that slow down your teams and simply don't work together. That's not SaaS. That's sad. That's software as a disservice. That's why you need Rippling. Everything that you need from global HR, payroll, IT, and finance all in one place. It's helped millions of businesses replace the mess of disconnected tools with one system designed to give leaders clarity, speed, and control. So much to dive into over there. Everything from onboarding to payroll and IT access runs automatically and perfectly in sync. Right now, you can get 6 months free when you go to rippling.com/lockedonnfl. That's rippling.com/lockedonnfl. That's rippling.com/lockedonnfl for 6 months free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints will have a new starting center on Sunday going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and this is a doozy for the New Orleans Saints. You remember that the Saints lost Erik McCoy after their 2-game fiery opening win streak early on in the season last year, and that set into motion a 7-game losing streak. The Saints would win 4 out of their 5 games with Erik McCoy in the lineup and only won a single game without him in the lineup. And now a 1-6 team here in 2025 just lost that player for the rest of the season. That is a tough hit for the New Orleans Saints from a leadership perspective, off the field, in the locker room, all that. Although he's still around the facility, he still does things when he's able to with, in the film room and in the classrooms and all those other things. So that leadership is very much still there at the facility. But it's going to be tough not having a guy like Erik McCoy who understands the system, who knows very well what it is that he's doing, that has the institutional knowledge as well, and has been a leader amongst this offensive line for years now, kind of the elder statesman, if you will, the leader in that way of this offensive line, and really along the offense as a whole. Him and Alvin Kamara being amongst some of the longer tenured players, along with Taysom Hill on that offensive side of the football. And so for him to come in and be that leader, but then the team lose that leader, that's a lot that you have to kind of make up for. Plus, he doesn't do a lot of things wrong on the field as well, which cannot be understated when it comes to a guy at center when you never say his name. And really the only thing we ever say about him is that we're praising him because of how well he plays, because of what he does pre-snap and, of course, in the action of the play. That's going to be very hard to replace. And it's not just going to be up to one player to replace it. However, a guy like Luke Fortner stepping in does have big shoes to fill. He won't be at it alone, right? The communication across the entire starting 5 offensive linemen, plus, of course, quarterback Spencer Rattler, are all going to be pivotal in trying to make up a little bit of the gap here with losing Erik McCoy. But there's still a lot of pressure on Luke Fortner going into this game. But a lot of players and a lot of coaches have voiced their confidence in him so far. Luke Fortner was acquired by the New Orleans Saints this offseason during the preseason in a trade with the Jacksonville Jaguars. You remember it's the trade that the Saints sent Colin Saunders to Jacksonville in return on a player-for-player swap. They ended up getting Luke Fortner in return. I liked the trade in the moment. I like it even more now because if you're an everydayer and you've been around this show for a long time, one of the things that you have heard me complain about year after year after year was this team not having a dedicated backup center. And to be fair, even before they traded for Luke Fortner, they had Will Clapp. They lost Will Clapp in the first preseason game up against the Los Angeles Chargers out in the West Coast or on the West Coast. And then ended up getting Luke Fortner. But so my point stands, the Saints put an effort twice into making sure that they had a viable backup center that focused at center and that wasn't starting at another position to where you lost one position and then had to move a player over from one place to the center spot. And then you needed to replace another player. They finally got over it. They finally stopped doing it. And I'm very happy that they finally stopped doing that. It's one of the things, just looking at this team, that drove me crazy for years and years and years, was that they could never just have an injury and a replacement on the offensive line. It was always an injury, and then you're moving this player over to that position, then you need to replace that position, and so on and so forth. It was the musical chairs effect. This is a much better situation for New Orleans. And so I wanted to highlight some of the things that folks have said around Luke Fortner already. and what this means for quarterback Spencer Rattler. Let me start there, because obviously that is a very important piece to this puzzle. I don't know how much this puts new responsibilities on Spencer Rattler's plate from what it is that Kellen Moore had to say about it. Moore basically said, look, Spencer Rattler is going to have the same list of responsibilities that he has in terms of the tools that are available to him at the offensive line. The changing of the guard at center, no pun intended there, or no weirdness, confusion intended there. But the changing of the center there is something that still keeps a lot of the responsibilities intact. And so it doesn't feel like or sound like it's going to add a lot to Spencer Rattler's plate as he gets started in this game. And that's big because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are not going to make things easy. Todd Bowles loves to blitz. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, according to our friends over at True Media, have blitzed on 32% of defensive snaps so far this season, making them the number 6 team in the league when it comes to that. And so that is a blitz-heavy team. We've always known that. That is an aggressive defense as well with the way that Todd Bowles deploys that front. Lots of stunts, twists, blitzes coming from different places, exotic looks, disguise, pre-snap, post-snap adjustments, all those things. So there's a lot of that's going to be going on here. And so with that, not necessarily clouding up what it is that Spencer Rattler is already having to pay attention to, it's a little bit of a plus, but now you're relying on a player that is not Erik McCoy, which is no shade at Luke Fortner. It's just that there's Erik McCoy and then there are other centers, right? Like Erik McCoy is a top 2, top 3 center in the NFL. And when you have to go from him to anyone else, there's going to be a little bit of a drop off. And so for Luke Fortner stepping into this role, it becomes very, very important, not just the way that he plays after the whistle, but the diagnosis, the IDs, the mental side of the game before the snap. We asked in the locker room Trevor Penning about this. Trevor Penning knows Luke Fortner. They were in the same draft class just years ago, and he had a bit of confidence to raise around Luke Fortner, where he said that, he's played center, he's been around for a while, and then he said he's a very bright guy mentally with all the IDs and stuff like that. He's good in that part. Physically, obviously, he's going to be great too. We're excited for him. That is the quote that he said. So pointing out unsolicited the mental side of this, which I think is going to be the most important part of it. Not only are you stepping in for Erik McCoy, who is very good at that part of the game, but you're stepping in for Erik McCoy up against a very aggressive defense that does a lot of interesting things, especially with their pass rush. So it's going to be a big test for Luke Fortner. Head coach Kellen Moore mentioned that they'll start him at center. He has confirmed that and said that he's done a really good job. He's played some good football, that of course he's excited for him. And one of the things that he mentioned was that he wanted to make sure that he kept the continuity on the right side and the left side. So he feels like things are trending well. So that goes to the point of, hey, it's good to have a backup center as opposed to moving guys around. So a lot of confidence. Doug Nussmeier, offensive coordinator, also sharing the confidence that he has in him. So we'll see where things go for the New Orleans Saints, but this could be a humongous factor in this week's game as Luke Fortner has some big shoes to step into and to try to fill with Erik McCoy out and him protecting a young quarterback in Spencer Rattler against an aggressive and innovative defense with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A big focus will be on the interior of that offensive line. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints, I would say, are healthy-ish going into this matchup up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but the Bucs, not necessarily. We'll discuss what kind of an advantage the New Orleans Saints could potentially have in the health conversation going into Sunday's game. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by our friends over at Mazda, and Mazda's moving the game forward. For those who believe that playing the game is not just about playing the game, but it's about redefining it as well. There are moments that do more than just put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. This week's player and moment that helped to keep the game moving forward for me, going back to last week's game up against the Chicago Bears, was Quincy Riley. His ability to take the football away is something that we have absolutely focused on since he was drafted in that 2025 draft class. He had the most interceptions of any cornerback in his class, and that showed up on the tape and, of course, in a big moment, getting his first career interception up against the Chicago Bears. He's somebody that instinctually fits really well, but now the action is following the instinct, and that could help to move the game forward for this New Orleans Saints defense. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning, and it's just like there's more to every highlight. There's more to every Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints are going into Sunday's matchup up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, mostly healthy in terms of their active and healthy roster. Meanwhile, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers don't look like they're trending in the right direction, which could give the New Orleans Saints a little bit of an edge from a health perspective, but it might not be enough to overtake the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this weekend. Let's break all of this down, get you all the injury information that you need to know going into this Sunday's matchup. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here with us. And of course, subscribing, following, sharing, liking, all that good stuff to help this show continue to grow. We appreciate you for everything that you do. And don't forget, you can find us as well every single Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. over in the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Same place where you can catch all of the Pelicans action this season. So the New Orleans Saints are what I would call kind of healthy. Healthy-ish going into this game. Obviously, they just lost Erik McCoy for the season. They just lost running back Kendre Miller for the season as well. But when it comes to the players that are on their healthy and active roster, they are looking good for the second week in a row going into this matchup. There was a little bit of concern on Wednesday with three big names not present: Chris Olave, who we've discussed earlier, Alontae Taylor, who we've discussed earlier as well, and then, of course, defensive end Chase Young were all absent on Wednesday. They all returned to practice yesterday on Thursday. We'll see where things go later on today, but it seems like everything's fine. Alontae Taylor missed for a personal matter on Wednesday. He was back on Thursday. Chase Young missed with illness on Wednesday. He was back on Thursday. I chopped it up with him a little bit in the locker room. Seems fine. And then when it comes to Chris Olave, dealing with an ankle injury, he had to kind of, the last couple of weeks, he's been going to the sideline and getting his ankle taped up a couple times during games and things like that. So that's been something maybe to keep an eye out on. Might be related to what this current ankle injury is, but it doesn't seem like there's any issue. Looked fine out on the field, watching him run routes and stuff like that during practice on Thursday. So everything seems good to go there. The only other little wrinkle that's been going on is that Juwan Johnson is dealing with a neck injury, which is always scary. Like, again, if you're an everydayer, you've heard me talk about this before. Back injuries and neck injuries scare the ever-loving heck out of me anytime that I see it for players. I went up to him and I asked him how he was doing, checked in with him and all that. But on Thursday, no non-contact jersey, was still limited in practice though, so we'll see how things go for him today. But it seems like everything's trending well. You're also watching an ankle injury for Alvin Kamara, but he's kind of been dealing with that over the course of the past couple of weeks. And now you know Devin Neal is going to be the guy, the young rookie running back that's going to step in to kind of share the carries with Alvin Kamara. It was really interesting. When we were talking to Doug Nussmeier on Thursday with the coordinators' media availabilities, he mentioned that one of the things that you track in terms of reps for your running backs is not just how many times they carry the football, but you also take into account outside runs and inside runs. And I asked a little bit about what the significance of that was, which it's probably pretty obvious for most people, but I just, I like to make sure we get the information. And outside runs in space, dealing with a little bit less contact, running in between the tackles, a little bit more contact. So you might count that as like more of a reason, or maybe more of, I don't know, maybe instead of maybe you count a perimeter run as one carry, but you might count it inside the tackles run for 2 carries because the amount of contact and sort of mucked up nature that happens on the inside of that or in the trenches rather. And so you might take that in consideration going into this game with a very good interior defensive line in particular for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and a good front. And so maybe you'll see more outside runs, but what can you get involved for Devin Neal? So we'll see exactly where that goes, but maybe something that you're monitoring, but with Devin Neal being somebody that this team is excited to get out on the football field and that he himself is excited to get out on the football field. I had a one-on-one conversation with him that I shared with our insider program, which you can join by clicking the link in the description or heading over to subtext.com/LockedOnSaints. We'll have more and more for our everydayers coming later on this year as well. So something to maybe keep an eye out on there. But the interview that I did with him was just like a quick one-on-one, just kind of chopping it up with him and seeing how he was kind of feeling going into this. And he kind of laid out a little bit of what it was like for that block where he had actually a route to run, the block where he cleaned up for Spencer Rattler. Jaquan Brisker was rushing around that left side. He got there just in the nick of time to keep Spencer Rattler clean. Talked about how he would do anything to keep his quarterback clean. If he had to lay out, he would do it. But it was an interesting one because his assignment was the linebacker on the right side. That linebacker didn't pressure or didn't rush. And so he actually had a route to run. But because of understanding the game situation of like a 3rd and long, his route to the flats, he was like, you know what, I'm going to stay in a little bit longer and then help to just in case basically. And then thank goodness he did, because then he was able to clean that up. Obviously that pass felt incomplete, but it showed a little bit of the high IQ that everybody praises him for having, as well as, of course, his ability as a pass blocker to actually get there and slow down Jaquan Brisker, who was on a heater up to that point as a pass rusher for Dennis Allen and the Chicago Bears. And so we'll see kind of where things go with managing Alvin Kamara's injury. But the good thing about Devin Neal as a pass protector is that you can have him on the field quite a bit because it doesn't necessarily give away what it is that you're going to do with him. Meanwhile, when it comes to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, obviously dealing with a lot of injuries. Bucky Irving is ruled out. Hassan Reddick is ruled out. Chris Godwin is ruled out, the wide receiver. The other top wide receiver, Mike Evans, is out for the season with a collarbone injury, or maybe not for the season, but for a long time for the rest of the season. So the Saints will not see him here in this matchup. And the Bucs are also dealing with some other injuries. Vita Vea on the defensive line. Now, he's been dealing with a foot injury all throughout the season, and it hasn't seemed to slow him down. So we'll see where things go with that, but something to watch there. Levante David, the linebacker, dealing with an injury. Emeka Ibuka, the phenomenal and front runner at offensive rookie of the year, the phenomenal wide receiver out of Ohio State. He's managing an injury as well. So just a lot to watch for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers when it comes to the health side, and the Saints finally having an edge this season a couple of times when it comes to health. But I don't know if it's going to be enough for them to topple the top of the NFC South. All right, we will see you after the game with our squad show. And if there's any big news, I'll see you before then. We appreciate you very much. As always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up, learn how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.